The demand for HR is growing. The required skill set is growing. So how do we distill that to say by activating curiosity and growth mindset as two cornerstone skills, actually everything else you can learn. Once I get into HR, I realized how naive I was. All this wonderful technology that we're talking about will make us even more human and not the other way around. It's not HR's job to own engagement outcome. You don't leave your company because you didn't like your HR. You leave your company because you don't like your manager. It feels heavy. It can't feel heavy. The future of HR and the work needs to feel lightweight.
Cool. Thank you so much, Susan, for making the time. Really appreciate it. Tell me, how are you, and anything you would want to talk about right now? If we were to talk about one topic, is there anything that is popping up in your mind? Anything top of mind?
A lot of time I keep thinking about life and our interactions, right? So it's been on top of my mind to think about interaction, that intersection between intimacy and that presentness in your interaction and also versus efficiency. Having meetings, you want to get stuff done, but at the same time, you're building relationship, you're having conversations, and you are trying to build depth of that. So it's been on top of my mind, various meetings, different conversations, building internally in teams and tech tools. Just, it's been a very multi-dimensional week. So that's been on top of my mind.
Efficiency versus presence, depth versus getting things done. For whoever doesn't know you, how do you introduce yourself usually?
I usually say, hi, I'm Susan Chen. I run Co-Grow, which is a boutique fractional HR and strategy consulting with a twist of tech, figuring out the future of work, the future of HR through building communities that are integrated and also technology that's more embedded and integrated as well. I am based in Singapore, but I'm from Taiwan originally and grew up in New Zealand.
Okay. I read you this week. The book that you wrote is The Death of Best Practices. Really enjoyed it. For someone who's in the HRMS world, best practices is something you basically, when you sell software, you sell best practices. I loved it. I loved your take. Can you summarize the key ideas in the book, what people should be looking forward when they open it?
First, the book is written actually with the premises about HR, but I always say that if you read the book, if you replace the word HR just with leaders, it really is applicable as well, right? So I'm hoping to write for an audience that's bigger just HR, but because I'm from HR, I use illustrative example from HR. So we speak about HR and sort of our journey within this, our relationship with best practices. The foundation, I think, of the book is based on this concept or the mindset that the death of best practices should not be a word that we uttered day to day, but at the same time, it's really a mindset shift. But I also will tap into this concept of growth mindset, but I want to make it really practical around how do we actually build growth mindset, right? How do we actually do this through activating curiosity and practicing grit as these core fundamentals? And why do I want it to almost demystify this growth mindset being a really, really big topic? Partly is because I think for the last 20 years, I've been in HR for 18 of those 20, is that I see the demand for HR capability as a list keep on growing. Grows from, number one, we used to be really good at the administration. And then for a certain point, it becomes we're anchor of employee experience. And then we have to be really good at the culture. Then we have to be really good at the financial acumen. And now we have to be really good at AI in the future of work. The demand for HR is growing. The required skill set is growing. So how do we distill that to say by activating curiosity and growth mindset as two cornerstone skills, actually everything else you can learn. So the actual two skills is actually activating curiosity and actually practicing grit. If we want to say let's do that versus all these other thousands of wish lists of skill sets. So that's kind of built based on these fundamentals, I think, beliefs and value sets where I wrote the book.
I think also the older you get, the more skills you get, you also start to have a long list of things you want to be able to do. And the more you discover, you also discover more weak points. Like you discover the universe of weaknesses you basically have. At the beginning, you're not aware. And it's always a bit overwhelming when you think about all the things you should be doing right. And then the list goes long. I mean, marketing, the same happens to me. And I love the fact that it was kind of freeing to say, like, you don't have to focus on 20,000 things. I think you talked about the list of competencies for HR people. The same, in marketing, you could talk about the number of channels you need to master,
yes,
or the different media, whatever. I love the freeing moment of thinking, okay, you don't have to worry about too many things. It's kind of, don't worry about what you do, worry about what you are, or something like that. I love you speak about cornerstone. For me, what I took was, okay, you have all the competencies and the list is extremely long and it will keep getting longer. Don't worry. Just focus on those two essential skills, meta skills, and then everything else is easy. You can apply that to them and maybe just scope it. Yeah, I loved it. I really loved it. Can you talk about grit a little bit, what it means?
To me, is really about having the tenacity. Actually, you couple that, right? Grit in itself, I think even in the book we talk about, is not just about keep going and going and going and going. I think grit is about knowing where to continue to push through and when for you to say, actually, this doesn't work. But part of it is why I think growth mindset, you couple this. We're not saying just have curiosity. You know, there's actually dark side of both of these strengths being overutilized, right? So that balance is having enough of the growth mindset to understand where your grit will push through for a breakthrough in transformation, or when that grit actually become counterproductive, right? And that similarly, even we think about innovation, right? Do we sometimes there's this sunk cost fallacy of saying, being really gritty, you keep going with a really bad idea that we know is not working. To me, two sides of that agility around when do you continue and when do you actually stop?
And what about curiosity? How do you activate curiosity? How do you maintain curiosity? Especially when it's almost like as we get adults, we have less and less curiosity. I think we have way more when we are children or even babies. How do you make sure that people who are adults still reconnect with it? And if they lost that curiosity, how do you reactivate it?
So the book tried to be super practical. We have some really practical tips to building habit. I think curiosity can be a habit that can be built, which means that remember to put in 5 minutes, you know, for example, every morning, starting 5 minutes with reading one thing that gives you something new. There's always two sides to a skills that you're building. There's a mindset piece, and that's actually skill set and habit piece. Mindset is how do you continue to be open. And that mindset, the curiosity mindset is really recognizing that we don't know everything, recognizing we need to keep learning and unlearning things. I started my career with best practices. I started my career working in companies that had beautiful best practices that I saw it could work. In that particular instant, I had to unlearn best practices. So curiosity is about learning and unlearning. So it's not just the one way or the other. And I think, again, these are great skill set that you can practice by almost forcing yourself. Although one thing I did want to start, because we both have young kids, and I have always been thinking about kids and their curiosity. And I do want to give adult the benefit of the reality of we need to create headspace and actually having time to activate and practice. So I also don't want us to kick ourselves and say we as adults are awful. I mean, as adults, we just don't have the same amount of time, and we don't have the same amount of headspace because we're thinking about all these things. So as much as we admire the beautiful things that's happening with kids and their curiosity, we need to find what does curiosity mean for us at this point in time. If that just means that every week you read one page of a book, let that be your curiosity. You know, let that be you.
Don't put pressure that it needs to be big. Yeah.
Exactly. Like these are small things, small habits, and it's about doing something different, learning, unlearning. I just want to take the pressure off because I know the curiosity and grit can feel super heavy. It almost feel like there's a value judgment, like, oh, you're not curious enough. Oh, you're not gritty enough. Versus where can I meet myself right now of my curiosity and my grit?
I wrote to you already that insight that came to me when I was reading Grit and Growth Mindset. I knew about the two books, by the way. So I knew about them. I never saw them connected. To me, it felt, and you were talking about it, the balance, it felt like yin and yang. Surrendering versus manifesting. I always hear that the world is too much about yang and not enough yin. And so I think if the two were in organizations, would you agree that it's too much of grit and not enough of curiosity? Would you see this as the unbalance, or am I just projecting?
I mean, no, I think that's absolutely right in the sense that similar to the example I just shared before, right? I think with too much grit and not enough curiosity, that's when you have the sunk cost fallacy. I believe this is the feature we're going to build because we're in tech. Let's just keep building. We don't listen to our clients. We don't listen to the user feedback, right? These are examples when we're not curious about our user experience and we just say, I believe this feature, and we just keep building and building and building. That's an example. In practice, I think we're too much grit and not enough curiosity. But there's also the flip side, right? Too much curiosity and not enough grit in the sense that, oh, we change every time. Then a user says, oh, I like that feature, or oh, maybe that will be really cool things to build, right? And you don't have enough grit to experiment and carry on and sort of see through some of the things that we build in the longer term impact. So yin and yang, absolutely. Balance, I think that is really the core. That's why just having one or the other feels like we're missing an opportunity to think about growth mindset in a multidimensional way.
How did you come to the world of HR? Why are you thinking about this?
Oh my God, why? Because I'm a bit of a geek now. I got into HR believing a lot of how multidimensional HR. So when I was a young kid, I actually started wanting to be a teacher. And then I wanted to be a psychologist. And then after that, I want to be a lawyer. And why is this important? Sharing this is number one is that this is when I was in New Zealand. I grew up in New Zealand and Taiwan, New Zealand. And do you know what these three have in common? I'm going to put you on the spot. Think about it as a profession: teacher, psychologist, and lawyers.
There's a lot of language.
Yes. Something even more practical. Something
control?
More practical.
There's a lot of control?
No. These three are typically geographically bound by licensing structure.
Okay.
So, for example, if you are a psychologist certified in New Zealand, you can't practice outside. You have to actually get other certification. Same as lawyers, same as teachers. Once I realized that and knowing I have a global ambition, I want to leave New Zealand when I was growing up, I kind of knew choosing one of those careers probably isn't going to get me to where I want to be. That was number one, very practical. But then I realized HR as a profession has a bit of everything, right? You can be in learning development, and then you have the training part of things. You can be a psychologist. This is where a lot of the coaching piece comes in. And you can be a lawyer because I need to learn about HR law. It would I move into HR thinking that was all these pieces that can satisfy my curiosity, what I really want to do in life. And now people's going to know my age because I started HR in New Zealand before it was called HR. I still remember it was called organizational studies. It wasn't even HR. Now, once I get into HR, I realized how naive I was. I had a lot of perceptions, maybe visions and dreams of HR as a function. And once you start practicing, you realize the outside in experience and expectations were nothing like that. You know, people expect us to be very good administration support. 20 years ago, even now, we're talking about what does that mean being strategic? What does that mean having a seat in the boardroom? I think I grapple with that my whole career is the vision of what this function can be and some of the reality that we are rooted in our practices. So I think with that, I constantly think about how do I be part of this profession and push us to that next stage of what my vision, I guess, a very naive vision of what I think HR could be. And that's kind of the fundamental push for me to continue to think of ways that we can continue to develop that function above and beyond the more traditional understanding or acceptance of HR. And we see that still happening now in the different parts of the world, right? We are nowhere strategic to the space that we want it to be.
So you have a very forward-looking vision, and that requires some depth of reflection on everything you do, also a lot of experience. What makes you dig so deep? Like, why not just go with the flow? What drives you every day to push the envelope and probably sometimes be a bit weird and provocational?
Yes.
Why not fit in, and just go with the flow?
Oh my God, fitting. I don't think I've ever fit in, actually, in general, in a good way. And what pushes me, I hope that I'm also a practice of what I preach myself around growth mindset and curiosity and grit, right? And what pushes me is the question that how do we continue to innovate and challenge the status quo? And I don't want to wake up every day to do the same thing. From a more selfish perspective, I just want to wake up to be excited about the work that I do. be energized by the community around me, be energized by the profession that I am. So that's a little bit, I guess, the selfish part, right? I want to be in a profession that I always say I will know that HR has really made it when I hear little kids to say, I want to grow up to be a CHRO. Yeah. Everyone now, they never say that, right? They grow up, want to be the finance bros. They want to be in the VC. They want to be AI engineers. Nobody ever says I want to grow up to be HR. Why not? It is sort of part of that innate, both curiosity and probably the stubbornness to say, I want to be part of that movement and the profession that we can continue to grow, and people want to be part of that movement. People want to be part of what the world that we're building and the future of work and the future of the profession.
If you were to describe to me the future of work, apart from that move from skills to meta skills or to those two, curiosity and grit, what else do you see? How would you like to be in the future? How do we manage talent? How do employees work? How do organizations come together? Employees is probably talent in the future.
Yeah, I think if I distill two parts of the future that I'm sort of obviously very passionate about, right? I think there's the future of HR and there's the future of work. I'll start with the future of HR, right? In terms of HR as a profession, I think the future is how it needs to feel lightweight, agile, and human and adaptive, right? Rather than heavy processes and papers and conversations. And I mean, conversation are great. I'm just saying every time, if right now you say you need to have a performance review conversation, everyone's like, oh, it feels heavy. It can't feel heavy. The future of HR and the work needs to feel lightweight and engaging. And that require us to work differently, technology to be different, and the way that we think about process different, right? Like something I talk about is, why do we need to have annual review? Why aren't we just have constant feedback conversation? So that's the future of HR. I think the future of work, there is a marrying to that, but I do want to envision or focus on a world where all this wonderful technology that we're talking about, AI, blockchain, so on, will make us even more human and not the other way around. So how do we utilize it in technology to really amplify what is unique to human, which is the way we can make decisions, the way we can forward project in a nuanced way? I don't think we will ever get into what I hope, fingers crossed, right, is that I don't want technology to take the place of great managers, great coaches, great team members, great colleague relationship. I want them to amplify that. And I think that is, I hope, for the future of work.
Where do we think we are compared to what you were describing?
I think we're at the inception point. We're at the point where they are visions and realizations, and they are a lot of buzz and conversation about it. But I think we have yet fully understand how can we build our world in a much more interconnected way. And what do I mean by that is I still see, and I use HR technology since we're both also in that world, is that I'm still seeing the building of HR technology in a much more siloed way. There's a little part of this employee experience is being built. There's another part of employee experience being built, and not recognizing how do we find ways for these to be much more integrated, like an actual seamless experience that is almost invisible to power the human rather than taking too much space for human to be human, if that makes sense. It feels like we're still in a very early stage, I think, of that evolution, which is a wonderful thing, actually. That gives me lots of hope. Yeah, like we can be part of the movement. We can be part of the change. We both have young kids that we can be part of shaping how our children's going to experience the future of work.
If I think about the speed of change, I mean, I feel like organizations are still quite broken. I mean, most of them are very inefficient. And every time my own team is not as efficient as I would like to make it, I'm not as efficient as I would like to be. There's always such a massive gap between the dreams I have and where we are. I don't see how we can improve towards the future of work in a fast enough way, because I feel like the complexity is increasing and AI is going to solve many things, right? But right now I feel we're still getting more problems than solutions because it's quite overwhelming. the quantity of data we are getting. I'm just working on one function at the moment. There's so many vendors coming up, new techniques, new practices. The making sense of everything is extremely difficult. So for me, when I'm thinking about this, basically this is the list we were talking about earlier, right? And so if I go back to the freeing, let's just focus on this simple thing, And at the core, I think you're talking about curiosity and grit. For me, it's presence. Like it's going back to the essence of the. It's okay, but I maybe that's just going to be way better. The feeling is as we get better, the challenges are also getting harder because of the great acceleration or whatever they call it. Speed of change is increasing. And so I don't know how as humans we can cope. So AI is coming whenever it will be able to cope with those challenges as well. But yeah, to me, I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. I might be a bit pessimistic this week. I don't know. But I see more and more challenges, and I don't see a path to solve them. Right now, speaking about it, that's the energy I'm embodying, I guess.
Well, that was a heavy take on change. That's why I also say I think we're in that very, very early stage, right? I was just thinking about the last night is some ginormous changes in our society happens because there is a black swan event. How COVID has accelerated this idea of remote work and itself has created a lot of other adjacent innovation like EORs, right? Now there's lots of one is, in my head, I was like, what is the black swan event or product? Like OpenAI is a black swan product. They make it so simple. Now everyone can have AI and all of a sudden that feels different because AI has been around actually for more than the last decade plus, right?
Yeah.
So the issue is not that AI is new. The issue, or not the issue, the challenges now is available to everyone. So what do you make of it becomes that next big exploration as human being. I think the world we're going to move into, quite frankly, is going to become even more fragmented. I think the reality is that there are going to be pockets of our world that will live to that future, that lightweight, that agility, all the things we talk about. And they are going to be the parts of the world that are going to be left behind. So the question for us as human beings is, how much are we okay for those gaps and for the people to be left behind versus do we bring everyone? Because it feels overwhelming, right? If we're trying to say everyone needs to be in this pockets. So that's
you can't force it as well. I mean, people need to choose it. If you start having everyone doing it, or if you try to push that the entire population is moving towards this, it needs to be chosen. So we need to step into it ourselves. Is it the conclusion, what you arrived to, the curiosity and grit in your research of what to do, to embody the future and do better? Is that kind of the conclusion? Are there more insights coming from you?
I wrote the book before COVID and sort of a little bit during COVID. And also that was when I become a parent. I have to say there are new perspective and experiences, but I think the same principle I keep going back to is how do we distill down mindset and skill set, right? What are things that can become even more practical ways for us to navigate? I almost feel like the more complex our world become, the more distilling and simplification we need to be able to bring ourselves to be in order to be grounded, right? So there are more things I've been working on is really thinking about, okay, there is curiosity, there's grit and growth mindset. And now thinking more practically, there are things like I've been more overtly now talking about first principle thinking and systems thinking as a really next cornerstone to drive change and innovation. There are these great big terms, but how do we distill that in this world of complexity is sort of the next phase that I'm developing to think about. Still in the context of HR, still in the context of our profession going through that evolution and change. So stay tuned for book number 2.
When you get people, like I read in your book, you were talking about the fact that when you go on a mission, you talk about with leaders and some of the first thing they ask for you to give is the best practice. So what is
absolutely
competitor number 2 doing? So how do you navigate those conversations and how do you get them to realize the benefit of not doing the best practice, but actually going deeper, as you said? Yeah. What's your process and how do you give them what they want? Because when you want to win a client, you still need to deliver some of the things they want, but how do you make sure that they discover your perspective and implement those insights you have?
So I think there's two different things. So when I was working in-house, the relationship between you and the people you're working with also is slightly different, right? And the way you think about performance, navigating that looks a little bit different. So when you're working inside core the startup, the founders are asking you these questions. Some of the pushback becomes a little bit more, let's be research-based and help you to see it doesn't matter that best practice because they're not you. So there's a little bit of doing the work and showing it because you are part of the organization, right? So part of education is doing the work and then navigating that. I do think it's quite different now, now building my own consultancy is that number one, I make it really clear to my client, this is ours. This is my approach. So if that's not the type of mindset you want to navigate together, that I'm comfort to sit together, I'm not the right fit to support you, right? So that's number one. So I wouldn't do it to win a client. I can have but freeing conversation. To your point of freeing is I always ask them, like if they say, tell me what Google does, I'm kind of like, let's talk about this, right? Like, are you Google? And usually they'll get to a point to realize, actually, I'm not Google. When I'm building the same product, I just think they are really cool as a company because they managed to bring them to $1 billion company. When you have an actual human conversation, again, the curiosity, right? Then I just generally activate the curiosity and say, just tell me a bit more. Why Google? How does this link to your vision? And sometimes they may come up with things that makes a little bit of sense, right? They'll be like, actually, it's because we're hiring a lot from Google. So I want to know their best practices so I can hire. So I'm like, oh, actually, wait. So what you're talking about, you want to attract talent. You want to attract great caliber talent, but attracting them is not giving them what Google gave them because you're never going to be Google. We know the best grads will tell you they will give you a bunch of things that you can't afford. So let's come back to what makes you unique. The right question to ask is, what is so unique about you and your company so that the people who has worked for Google want to work for you? Let's build what's uniquely you. So it's I'm, sharing a very different experience and the way I would deal with it is quite different, right? One is kind of like, okay, I'll do research, I'll sucker up and I'll show you how they do it. And then we'll come to the same conclusion is that it doesn't work for you. We can take inspirations. And then why I love what I do now is I can really unpack some of these with my clients and really work with them to build from zero.
And what are the type of topics you engage clients with? Anything HR? Are there specific missions that you enjoy more? What is it that you do?
We actually focus on only two things. One is fractional HR, which is building your infrastructure for talent and culture while you scale. And that's everything from building a career ladder to relooking at what is the skill set we need in organization and towards those, right? So it's building those infrastructure. The second piece that is really close to my heart is about talent continuity. So that is about how do we now look at your existing talent? How do we amplify their strengths through strength-based coaching as individual, as a team, and then also working on things that is close to me is talent continuity through succession planning in a skills-based manner, right? To be much more intentional around how do we make sure we build for the future requirement of your organization. So one is building the foundation. Second is how do we continue growing and building within your existing team. So these are the sort of the two things I love, I enjoy doing, and then continue to focus on and grow with my team.
In a way, the first part, both have best practices and you could have meta skills for how do you do to not do the best practices game, but still without reinventing the wheel. So do you have recipes that you take? Also, every case is unique. So how do you go and start a mission with a client?
If I think about best practice, I think about outcome, right? So like you're trying to do something the same way. That's sort of best practice. So yes, it's a bit different to when I say there's a standardized way for you to onboard your client, which means that I could ask the exact same question to every single client and the answer is different, which will drive a different outcome, right? What is your vision for your organization? it's not like every time I'm reinventing the wheel of the question, right? Of navigating, understand where you are right now, where do you want to be? But what we end up building is very nuances based on their own insight, their own vision, and their change. So there's a slight difference between that. There's a standardized approach and experience of working through with our client, but the outcome is always unique to our client. There's no repurpose one client's engagement framework to another. If you really do this in a co-creation way, you just will never end up in that point.
And you talked about fractional. It's a new term. I mean, at least that's one I've known for not so long. How is it to do fractional in Asia, knowing that most people talk about outsourcing, I think? What is the difference between fractional and outsourcing?
So how I sort of differentiate them, again, from an HR point of view, right? Outsourcing HR, there's a lot more focus on efficiency. Right. So you usually will outsource. It means that there's another team that looks after, and they're outside your team. That's why it's called outsourcing, right? Sitting in a different place. They have an operational email, and then you're like, okay, that's a lot of that focus on operational efficiency, which is beautiful because a lot of time it takes a lot of bandwidth of existing team if it's not managed in an efficient way, right? So that to me is a great value of HR outsourcing. Fractional to me is as a layer to, like I started our conversation around this thing I keep navigating between efficiency and intimacy. So fractional HR is about bringing in the leadership that is embedded with a strong context and understanding, and therefore the intimacy of your organization when we are making recommendations of outcome. And that's much more contextual, much more nuances, they're much more agile. Again, and to me, that goes back to that lightweight practice, right? Because a lot of time, a startup don't need a full-time CHO. Like you end up going to struggle by either putting someone who doesn't enjoy the operational pieces that come with, that's just a reality of building infrastructure, or you find someone who doesn't have the skill set and experience, and quite frankly, the budget to actually do that, right? So how do you access the talent and the leadership that you need at your point of scale and then still be able to access that future orientation? Because I think that's the biggest thing that's missing, right? If we're too focused on efficiency of now, we forget to actually think of the longer term, which sometimes takes a lot longer. It's less efficient. It's not something you can templatize. It's co-creation. It's learning from things that's moving and shifting. So I think the interaction is very different. And even within fractional, there's two, I think, different anchors of fractional. You have fractional that really very much focusing on the high value advisory. And then you have where I'm sort of sitting in is both driving the intimacy of co-creation, but making sure we find enough efficiency to deliver on those, right? You can create a vision, but to me, if I'm not helping you to deliver that, to turn that into reality, the impact of fractional then isn't where I want to see sort of our team be able to engage at. So I'm very, very intentional not taking fractional advisory only. Actually, the reason I set up CoGrow was because I didn't enjoy purely advisory. I really want to be able to anchor the execution of a vision, of a strategy, of a future that we have co-created together.
When you were talking, I was thinking about what can be automated. It's kind of the same as the outsourcing, like the efficiency play is the same for the systems that you build. What can be best practicized? What can be outsourced? What can be efficiency led? And what should be done by HR, basically? So what is strategic? How would you differentiate the different processes? If you had to cut the elephant and say, these are for fractional, these are for outsourcing / systems, how would you define?
That's an interesting way to try to differentiate. So
and is it the same for everyone? Because maybe different companies did different things. I have no clue.
Well, I don't think it's as much that one process can be outsourced and one process not, right? Let's use performance management as an example. If it's a whole process, I think there's element of that could be best anchored using an outsourcing structure or operations base. And there's parts where fractional is really important to come in, right? For example, performance management. Fractional HR will be best position to continue to help and advise a leadership team how to run this or design this process, right? For example, if your value is transparency, do you choose a tool where 360 is not anonymous, for example? Really anchor value of an organization to organization, like your HR design. This is a very HR fractional space. But once you have a system and you run the process, making sure everyone put their things in and running reports, completion rate, reminders, that can be automated or outsourced for efficiency. But once you finish that, maybe now you see there is 10% of the organization is not performing. Then you come back to, okay, a fractional HR could be a great coach working with the leaders to think about how do we work with the underperformance, for example. So it's not so much that this process can be outsourced and this process cannot. I think is understanding that whole cycle or that whole experience. There's certain parts that can be more efficient. So the fractional HR can focus on what matters, which is those human embedded conversation. Because even with underperforming, it's so contextual. It's not just they're underperforming, right? Are they in the right role? You know, what's happening? How long have they been in the organization? Are they different things that's impacting their performance? Are there ways that we can improve by introducing different tools? So it's a lot more nuance that you wouldn't outsource, right? But there's a lot of efficiency that can be designed in a process or in a experience.
It's like you have the strategy, probably everything that is strategic, everything that is hard-based, like more emotional, everything that is more chaotic, human, I don't know. Like if you were to put a line, maybe not between fractional and outsourcing, but what can be automated or what is an efficiency play versus more, I don't know how to define the other one.
I mean, the other one is more nuanced. When there's something that's not black and white. Efficiency play is great when it's black and white. There is a legal template for employee contract. It's fairly black and white. But managing a underperformer is not black and white. Yes, there may be a best practice of, they will say, put them on performance improvement plan. That could be a best practice, right? No, that's actually not necessarily what you need to do with everyone or you should do, right? I think I would say things that is black and white, that's maybe where you can find the efficiency play, right? There's black and white, there's volume, and then there is the more nuance, the more gray. Actually, not just gray, the colorful. Why do we always say it's gray? Why don't we say the more colorful? The more colorful part of the human interaction, we should stay. We should keep them outside focusing on efficiency. And most of the time, they're not efficient. Coaching takes time. Impact takes time, right? So things that takes time should be the colorful side that you continue to keep within the human touch.
That's actually a very interesting one. You were talking about the future of work and having a seat at the board. I met quite a few people in HR and we were talking about not having the seat at the board or just not having enough power in decisions with the C-level team. I think I came to the conclusion that it was a matter of not having direct impact. The coaching doesn't give you direct fruits that you can measure. The fact that it's also very long-term, as you said. If you compare to a marketing budget, for instance, where you put $200 on Google and let's say you get 50 leads, I can clearly tell my CEO, you do this, you get that within 3 weeks. And then you can close that many. And then so the output is quite clear. Sales can do similar things. I mean, most functions have this kind of, you do that, then you get that. So input and output are quite clear. With HR, the best practices, as you said, don't work in many cases because it's chaotic, it's human organizations. But also you have those problems of not having direct link between the outcome and the input and the process and the lack of having short-term stuff. So how do you think, and also most things are not measured actually. It's not even about this, there are those problems, there's lack of measurement. So there are plenty of issues that are getting in the way of having the power that is needed for those topics. How do you navigate this at the moment? What is your take on it?
I think it's a good point. And that's why before AI, the big thing was like big data, right? Getting as much data and we can do correlation. And, you know, I've been through that phase of correlation. That's why we love engagement surveys. We love lots of data. There's a few things I want to add when it comes to impact, right? Number one is also a lot of time HR is being held accountable to outcome that's not for them to own. It's not HR's job to own engagement outcome because you don't leave your company because you didn't like your HR. You leave your company because you don't like your manager. So number one is, are we even holding the HR team accountable? So if I go back to this and maybe I focus on this human side, right, it's about these interactions that we have. Because at the end of the day, you're having interactions, whether that is with employee as a group or as an individual, as a leader. How I'm now a lot more focused on is this sense of progress. Do we come out from this conversation and this interaction feel like we're progressing? That is impact. So when you say coaching is long-term, yes, but you could come out from a coaching session and go, I think I just moved this a step forward. You can. If we start measuring interaction moments, I'm pretty sure the way we talk about impacts are different. It's just we don't measure them the same way, right? We don't have the HR satisfaction survey, like customer satisfaction. We don't have that. I think that's one. And then second is so easy. Organizations have short memories and we always remember the bad things and we always blame HR, right? Oh my God, HR did the firing. No, HR did not make the decision to downsize. There's a bigger organizational decision. There's all this myth around it. There are myths that you can work on it as an HR professional to change or change it collectively. Again, I go back to my individual focus really is, do we walk out from all these interactions feeling like there is progress? And if there is, then I think we're moving towards the right direction of impact.
So in the ideal world, not being a bit more positive, now that AI is coming and can listen to every conversation we have or even look every chat, it would be possible actually to feel whether at the end of an interaction, without even actually reporting it, just this phone in the room, listening to us, would be like, I think you had an insight today. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And then the coaching conversation can happen. You don't have to, because it's a pain, right? To even document a meeting. Like right now, if I had to do a transcript of what we've been doing, I would not want to do it and I enjoy it. But if I need to do it, I'll do it. But it's a time wasted.
Yes.
So as long as we can get all these interactions little bit synthesized and then weighted.
Yeah. That's a really interesting perspective, actually, I have not thought about. Like, how do we measure those interactions, right? Because a little bit, I guess, right now, there is a bit more overt feedback look as well, right? I make sure through these interactions, I ask, how are we progressing, right? But I think that's a really, really interesting point is how do we start embedding some of these? And you're right, there are AI, there are lots of tools that's being built that's going to be embedded in organizations although like a tool that I know that someone's building is more to help you to coach, like for example, this meeting, it could, after this, will give me a report and then to say, Susan, you talk too much. Okay, this is a podcast. I should be talking a lot. But in a normal meeting, right, it would say, Susan, you're talking too much. You're using these words that probably wasn't as, right? So they're using for those personal feedback point. But it's really interesting, actually, as a thought of how do we start measuring interactions from that sense of impact and progress.
Yeah, there's big drawbacks from a privacy point of view, but there's a beauty in thinking that you can analyze all chats between people. I was thinking actually back in like 2 years ago when I was doing an offsite, I was trying to understand the relationship between each employees and whether those relationships were important to the company, right? So if you have two managers who are not talking too much, but they should be, that's a problem, right? So you can actually with Slack, with Teams, whatever tool you use, know the people who are talking the most, and then find connectors within the organization just through the messages. This is the reason why we don't know so much, is because it's loads of different interactions on different channels, but AI is going to help very soon. So maybe we get there.
But I mean, before we move on from that, right, I think, yes, I'm sure there's tools that are going to be capable of it, but there's also that mindset, right? That openness. You need to be in an environment that's open for those data to be used and analyzed. And so I think that's another piece around those mindset. And HR is a really interesting one because most of the time it's super confidential. We don't actually want it to have on transcript where someone comes to HR and say, okay, I'm having issue with my manager, right? So I think there is the practical reality of how much you create an intimacy environment through making sure that these are private and privileged conversations.
Yeah. So there's one thing about you were talking about it, I think you said intimacy, and what's the other one that keeps coming?
Efficiency.
The
intersection, that's what I sort of say.
Yeah, to me, there is it's like almost short-term and long-term. It's like, do I invest in the relationship and the place and building the trust, or do I invest in getting the outcome faster? We need to operate so fast most of the time that as we are going more towards in efficiency than in in intimacy? Is it what is happening at the moment, or what do you think?
I should think what's happening now is the human skills of how do you build intimacy faster.
This is what's needed.
Well, I think that is the world we need to move. Yeah, what is needed. And to answer the question of do we need to trade off that? I don't think it's a trade-off between intimacy and efficiency. I think one is we need to learn to build those authentic intimacy faster. And then backed up by understanding what are the changes that needs to happen through the efficiency.
No, I felt, but the first time I met you, I felt we have our first meeting. I felt like I knew you very quickly. Do you think it can be taught or it can be learned? Maybe better?
I think to a certain extent, well, it can be learned through practice, through being curious. And part of building that intimacy is being curious and open, right? The reason we had a great conversation is that you were curious about what I do. I was curious about your experience. How does our world come together from a past, present, and future? How do you lead people through that is how you build intimacy fast. And I don't think it is a brand new skill. I think is being more intentional, understand what it looks like in a professional setting and channeling and focusing on some of these skills above and beyond all these other technical skills that we talk about.
Since I joined Brio, I think there was a conversation on admin HR, so more like operational, and it's like all the things related to payroll, claims, leaves, these kind of things. And then you have more something for talent management, like performance management, etc. And then you can put in that category employee engagement, or you can have another category. But it feels that people are convinced they need admin stuff because they need to run payroll. So that's kind of a no-brainer. You need it. And doing it on Excel spreadsheets or manually is just way too inefficient, and it's too costly actually for organizations, and risky as well. So not only costly short-term, but long-term it can be extremely costly. So that one is kind of a no-brainer, like you need one. The other two are more difficult. There are mindset problems. So do we really need performance management? There is process problems. How do you help people like layer or stack all these different aspects? And yeah, I think maybe that's first one would be interesting. I heard what you were saying about fractional and then the talent succession planning, etc. So maybe how do you layer those? And then I'm interested also in understanding if you see commonalities between the organizations that have done none of the higher ones, and how do you think we can engage them? Two big questions, sorry.
Two very big questions in one. So I'll answer the first one first. How do you layer them? I think you layer them with patience, actually. Is recognizing, and I used to say this, and I still believe this throughout my career, is that until we get those fundamentals right, there is no space for us to sit down and have a strategic conversation. Just because I focus a lot more on the strategic side of HR does not mean that's why we build those efficiency, is recognizing with all our clients, some of the efficiency is the biggest pain point right now. You have a lot of the founders are double hatting as HR. We need to take the admin load off them before we can talk about what is that strategic. And it's generally a natural human growth trajectory is once we take away all those administration, the foundation side of things, then eventually they have the headspace and they will come to you and say, oh, I'm a little bit concerned about the performance of some of our teams. What are some of the ways we can co-create? So you almost have to recognize you absolutely have to get the foundations as seamless possible so there's room for that conversation. So you build it through patience. You build it through clearly articulating the foundational importance. And then that's when you can layer those conversations. And how do I normally do it is that at some point, these pain points will show up in a different way. So how do you as a strategic leader is to spot those opportunity for growth conversations, right? Like, for example, if the founder comes to you and says, I'm so frustrated because we are hiring and the hiring is so slow. Right? We cannot get these people, we cannot hire fast enough. Let's say that's one, right?
Yep.
Or they come to you and say, oh no, now the people we've hired 3 years ago, they don't know where to grow in their career. They don't have a perspective, right? And this is where instead of best practice, say, oh, they don't know where to grow, let's put them in learning, right? That could be an immediate response. Or a best practice approach is let's build a career ladder. Then you say, okay, let's talk about What is your, again, what are the vision, what's alignment, what the growth plan, understanding where business is going. Actually, a lot of the challenges, we try to layer a solution without connecting to what's really important for them. Founders, leaders, we work with SMEs as well. So it's not just startup, scale up, right? So these leaders care about their business. The business are their baby, right? So that's sit down and say, I hear you, right? Recruitment's hard, performance is a bit patchy. So tell me a bit more, right? Tell me about your growth trajectory. Actually, we want to grow into 3 other countries, but I don't know how I can do this if we don't. So understand that, and you can help them to look backwards. Okay, now knowing you want to grow into these 3 countries, what are the ways that we can start planning towards that? So then all these more strategic, or to what you said, sort of the higher level tasks, start having meaning in the work they do. When you can't connect the meaning, then it's just another HR thing. HR want me to do performance review versus performance review is going to help me to scale into different country and attract great talent. That's very different position. The outcome is the same, right? We're creating performance review, but that co-creation, that understanding, that curiosity. And I think for the leaders who want to adapt to it comes back to your embedded, created intimacies through understanding.
So basically starting with the strategy of the company, not the strategy of the HR. And
Absolutely.
Then linking to, okay, one big problem that I experienced myself, but I'm wondering how do you do it? You can sell a mission with a CEO and say, look, we're going to do this. You can find strategic alignment and there's a clear path. Let's say you audit the operations, you have a clear goal. Now you have a path forward. They committed or she committed to clear action plan. And then you have to go down each layer and sell again the program. How do you do this sequential selling or engaging or inspiring, whatever you call it, so that each individual in the organization is as excited as the CEO who might have shown resistance at the beginning, just like them. But it's kind of like, oh, no, it should be a done deal because the leader of the organization is okay. But actually it's not. Are you, in your process, you expect the wall to face the wall at every person you meet?
I think you almost have to, right? To a certain extent, is that just like you understand the CEO's pain point as a human, those, as you continue work down to the different layer of the organization, they will all have their different pain points. They're all humans, they're different pain points, and no one is going to take action on things without fully understanding what's in it for them. Again, it's the human. And what's in it for them is that pain point, right? Are you going to make my job easier? Are you going to make me feel better? Are you going to solve my problem right now? You need to tailor by understanding those, right? The best case scenario is that I know, and this happened even with some of our projects, right? I see the CEO being super excited and they're the one that's champion, that's sponsoring it. And as you go down, you start seeing the deep root of the organization. So typically I would say the best way for us to give impact is you go top down and then you loop back up. Like, how do you also be part of the process of co-creation to help and hold some of these leaders accountable to some of these outcomes at the bottom, right? So for example, let's say the CEO is super excited about engagement surveys, right? And they, the bottom module, they want to start and they're like, I want 500 questions because I want to know deeply how they feel, right? Versus when you go down, they'll be like, no, we have no time, but I really want to tell him that the performance review is a problem and the engagement survey is not going to be the one. Like, so how do you almost help them by going back? So I have experiences where the CEO would purchase something, right? Like a project, and then we'll go all the way down and we go back up and say, let's tweak this. Let's think about what he has put in terms of we have committed into a project. There's a money on the table, right? There's an investment. So with the same investment, how are we agile enough to go back and say, maybe we need to tweak what you think you want in this different way. So I think that is kind of the reality loop of change management, is going down to deeply understand the organization and go all the way and still go back up. So it's a loop versus there's a top down and you push it down and for those implementation to sort of happen.
How do you deal with the trust building quickly? Because if you do the discovery with the CEO and then you need to do the discovery with everyone, but building the trust with everyone, the cost for you as a fractional, as a consultant is huge. And also the CEO might be like, okay, we did the discovery, now you need to implement. Are you going to do discovery 3 times and with each person? So how do you deal with that of accelerating the process without making them feel not heard, right? Because if you go but you kind of fake it to make it quick, it doesn't work. So how do you deal with that?
So in a very practical sense, it's almost finding your group in a much more elastic way, right? So typically in organizations that's slightly bigger, let's say 200 people, right? And then there's a project that has been commissioned by the sponsor, the CEO. I will usually design an interaction with a sponsor. Then you go elastic, so you go wide. The next stage is actually involve all the key leadership team in the next phase. And then you build trust. When it's this big, you don't build trust to 100% layer, but you build trust by opening door, by building the next layer of trust. And then you come back down on to build solid trust. And reality is usually a subset of this big group, right? So you almost have to figure out the real influencers or the requirement of this bigger group. It is time consuming, right? I won't lie. Some of these projects definitely takes a lot longer to build trust. But if you spend this time up front, your implementation pushback will be much less as well, right? So we've also learned it the hard way. If the implementation support isn't part of the decision making, then you end up spending way too much time on the implementation pushback versus spend upfront on deeply understanding the why and what are the things that's going to be introduced, what are the mindset shift that's required, and then that implementation becomes a lot smoother. There's an upfront cost versus comes into the tail end. It's probably all going to average out to be the same.
I remember one stat, it was like 30% of the transformations fail, and also it's 30% of employees globally are engaged. So it was like the same ratio.
Yeah.
When I think about the peak performance of future of work, my take on it is high performance, so basically right output, but people are happy in their role, etc. So there are many different things, but one of the things that keeps coming in my mind is how engaged people are, and like are we giving 100%, where we truly committed? But it means different things for different people, because if you have kids and you need to take care of them early in the evening, maybe your work day will be smaller, but you can be engaged in the same. So it's basically engagement means different thing for different people. But I feel a big problem is the lack of connection with whatever we're doing on our work day. I'm lucky enough to do what I love, and I've always found a way to love what I do, I imagine also. How do you think it can be done from both the organizations and the talent in the organizations?
I almost feel like this best practice mindset of like everyone needs to be super engaged and love the work we do. Like, do we really?
I feel, okay, what else? Then we just give up on 70%.
No, well, I don't mean give up on these human beings. Number one is, to your point, right? This definition of engagement itself is problematic.
Okay.
Right? That 30%, what does that mean, is problematic. And the question then to you becomes, if someone comes to work, do their job just enough, is that engaged? People think engagement is going above and beyond. Right? So the whole definition of engagement is flawed. So this whole idea of, I understand as a sentiment, I think all these great trends is a great sort of trending sentiment. But who is there to say that before COVID or before whatever whirl is that we were all a lot more engaged? I don't know, right? Are we more engaged, or do we just not know better? Or do we just not have more options, right? Like, I used to go to the office every single day. I can't imagine doing that anymore. But that does not mean I'm any less engaged.
I would not look at this particular element. I mean, yes, you can, some people might, how long you spend in the office, how long you spend working. You send an email at 7 p.m. instead of whatever. I don't judge this from that angle. For me is, am I passionate about the thing? I think the extra mile, I don't say it's the right thing to think, but I think like being consumed by your work, like having passion basically. And do we really want that? I kind of feel like we do. I want to be feeling like I'm playing basically, and I'm enjoying. And within that play, I'm still useful to this group of people and my clients and my community. So I feel, yes, I want that. So if I was to define it better, maybe I want to be fulfilled at the end of the day by whatever I'm doing. And I want this fulfillment in whatever I'm doing. So this work to be giving an outcome that is useful for the community at large, my employer, my boss, my team, my clients, my partners. That's what my definition of engagement. But it's true that I have a bias towards, I'd want you to, if you were in my team, I would want to be a peak performance team and just not overwork, but definitely like burn into this passion of HR or tech or whatever. And I'm not saying that's the best way to do it, but that's the way I like to work.
But I think that's why you have the flip side. We measure engagement and then we measure burnout and we get so confused with all these things, right? You could say, I'm so engaged and I'm burnt out. So there's so much value attached to engagement and burnout, right? So again, that's why I more and more question this best practices or even do engagement surveys, right? Like what can you do so if my company, if I have a survey that tells me 70% of people are not engaged, what does this actually mean, right? So if I go back to measuring impact, right? Let's just go back to our conversation even about a moment in time of understanding impact through moving forward. Does engagement look differently in the sense that if people are doing their work? I guess my question is it okay people just come to work and do their work? They do good work, but they don't want to go above and beyond. They don't want to. How do we classify them any less engaged versus those go above and beyond? Like it goes back to, are we just perpetuating a hustle culture, burnout culture? And I'm also guilty of it, right? I'm like,
I'm tired today to the point I think I'm burnt out for the week.
I want people, absolutely,
So,
right? So engagement, the dark side of engagement is burnout, and we're so focused on what does this number actually mean.
I hear you. What I realized when I was talking is truly I'm burnt out. Right now, if I was honest with myself, I'm completely tired.
At this moment in time, right? At this moment in time.
It's not a taboo word for me. Like today, I'm burnt out. Like I can't provide much value. I love this conversation, so I'm happy to have it. If it was any other thing, I would prefer to be home and sleeping, But I'm enjoying this conversation enough that I'm passionate and there's still energy flowing out of me. I think the problem that I see, I was talking about the acceleration of change, and the fact that most things are very hard to understand. We're overwhelmed with the amount of data. And yes, you spoke about simplification, but the simplification needs to come from the right insights. So you simplified to curiosity and greed. I simplify further to presence. To me, that means something. I don't know whether this will be meaning something to the audience, but to me, it means something very deep. And I know that I'm on the right way if I do presence the way I believe in it, So it doesn't matter. I'm not going to talk about this. The point is you synthesize everything into something that you believe or is truly working and has impact. The belief thing is very important because that might not be it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm delusional. And this insight that I have, it makes no sense. So to me, when I'm speaking about going above and beyond, and that might be because I've been in tech in fast-growing companies, but there's so much complexity and so much overwhelm of data and difficult challenges to solve that don't have a black and white answer. It's all chaotic. What you need in a team is someone who's able to do the job they've been hired for, and then able at the same time to take a step back like we're trying to do from the bigger picture and be like, am I doing the right thing? And then fix it. And so basically you need to have those different perspectives on the work, and each of them takes time. Like doing the job will take time. Taking a step back to build the tools so that you can programmatize what you do takes time. And then having a reflection on, am I doing the right thing? Did I synthesize the overwhelming amount of data to the right insight? Or am I building the wrong thing? Yeah. And this requires highly engaged people, highly intelligent people as well. And it's hard that's the thing why I need people that are engaged, because if you're not, you won't be able to face that amount of data.
Yeah. I mean, I would say everything you just talked about, what I didn't actually hear engagement. What I hear is agility.
Okay.
Right. So should we be measuring agility within an organization versus engagement? Right.
What is agility for you?
Is everything so you talk about is like, can you pivot? Can you find ways to solve issues? Can you distill, right? Because I guess why I want us to push to think engagement differently is that engagement is multi-dimensional. I could be disengaged in a job because I have a crappy manager, right? I could be disengaged for many other reasons, but agility is something a little bit more innate to individual, and it allows you to think about, I think if we measure agility, then we can ask ourselves as an organization, what are the blocker of agility for our teams? And you start solving for blockers rather than are they engaged? Oh, you're a bad person for not going above and beyond. I could be the most agile person, but there are blockers around for me to achieve the outcome I want. I guess it's changing the language and what we measure, help us to break out. Why I love challenge the way we use words, because even words have a best mindset mentality, right? We have value to it. Like we now value the word engagement. Like if you're not engaged, you're bad. No, I'm not engaged because there's multi-dimension around it that doesn't always show up in the engagement survey, right? So if we measure agility, How quickly are we solving issue? Are we allowing, like, if we start answering question on agility, right? It's no longer, Susan, are you engaged at work? But Susan, do you have the tools to help you pivot? Do you have the tools to help you distill insight? Do you have, a pathway to have difficult conversation? These are not questions we ask really engagement survey the same way, right? So I guess it's coming back to using different languages and therefore channeling more practical way. I do want to shift that into that practical insight so we can do something about it. So we can shift people from 30% being engaged to 80% more agile as an organization. Do you want a engaged organization or an agile organization?
I'm buying I think questioning the term and making sure we're talking about the same thing is extremely useful, and understanding what it means to each person in the room, or especially if you do strategy on how to improve something, you probably need to understand the term. So that totally agree. I feel you can be, I don't know what it would mean to be agile, to be honest. I don't know what the other aspects of agility would mean for you, but I might not be able to explain agility as well as I would like to in order to make it something that you would value in that conversation. But to me, there is a certain amount of passion or focus or presence to a topic or to a relationship. So it's basically, energy is good because there's no time, because otherwise, like, how much time you put to a topic, but you could spend 8 hours and not be fully present in those 8 hours. So I don't know what metric we can put towards it, but that's why I'm talking about fire, the burning, the passion. To me, this is necessary. I need to come up and, like, meaning, it's going with meaning, but it's how you react to meaning. So that's meaning to me so I can work. I don't know. I guess my next step would probably be to Google again engagement and see, to try to define it better. When you see this, you, as an advisor and a fractional HR, you come in and you don't do engagement. You try to understand what it means to them. And then you try to go to the root of what they're trying to achieve, and you don't go through the buzzwords, basically. That's your message.
And what we're trying to measure, right? If we really want to understand sentiment, there are different ways to measure it. For example, if you ask one question every week versus asking 700 questions in every quarter,
you get fatigue after. It's like when you will have, even if you ask once every 2 weeks or every week, like, I'm asking stuff from the team to like posts or to repost stuff. And I'm asking once, and then the second time I'm like, I know that so fatigue is gonna come in. I think AI, what we were talking about earlier, of having bots that are taking account of everything, is probably better. Now, to me, if we go back to the engagement question, whatever we define a good life, or being productive in an organization, and the organization being productive to the members of the organization, whatever word you want to use, the ratio is still, to me, it's still very few people happy, and most people that are not completely satisfied. What's the path to improve that ratio?
I don't know. I think if we want to get a little bit more philosophical about it, I think getting philosophical about it, I honestly don't know how much the disengagement or disenchantment with work is just a workplace issue. I think our world is going through these tremendous changes. Maybe more people are just more burned out from our world around us. Work is a big part of it, but we're navigating not just work, the things around us are changing rapidly. That burnout is happening rapidly. So a part of me, and that's me philosophically and also thinking as a system thinker, I think our system around work is making us disengage. Is it really about solving the work issue, or is thinking about the system we operate in, the society, the education, the whole shebang is making us more disengaged as human, not more disengaged at your particular workplace?
I don't know if it's philosophical, but I love the change of frame that you do. I think it makes great sense. Like, if you do engagement surveys before and after an election, and people are super disappointed, I guess that's a massive impact. But I never thought about how it could impact actually the mental health, just the happiness, the joy of people. Yeah. Okay, that's a great point. When you have a thought and then someone opens a different window or gives you an insight, I think it's really useful. And it's rare. Usually it's the curiosity thing and focusing on what matters and grit. So when you do a lot of grit or getting things done, you have to focus. And having those conversations opens the mind again. And I rethink about topics I thought I knew or I thought I've understood. And then you go back and, okay, that's actually might not be the case. Or it probably not is the case. What's next for you at CoGrow?
We are building technology under CoGrow, but I want to be really intentional around how do we bring this technology to the world. There's enough HR tech around. There's enough data around, right? It's not about creating more things. I want to build things that connects the things that is out there already. So helping, also how do we bring a more lightweight, more human type of work approach as we continue to work with growing companies to build their talent and culture infrastructure. So that's what's next, right? Thinking about how do we continue to make more impact through fractional HR, but also building technologies, being really mindful of how fast things are changing around us so that we're not just another noise in technology. We are finding ways to create meaningful connection of things that's already happening around us.
I think that's the key. I think one of the biggest problems I see of, I'm not going to say HR, but basically the way we build processes in companies, or same for CRM, by the way, like everything that is human-based. So you try to communicate with humans more and more efficiently or effectively. You always have a lot of data entry. And right now you have less and less needs of data entry in many levels. Like you have coaching tools that listen to every calls you do, like what you were describing, not having to take notes of someone taking notes of what you've done and then giving you feedback. It can happen automatically. And I think as the less data entry we do and the less data messaging in tools, the more time we have to actually do the work that matters. I think I remember being in sales a long time ago and we were asking for qualification framework. So you had to fill a form of what happened in the call. And we were always complaining. It's like, I spend more time in the form, like typing the stuff than actually on the phone because it's a very quick call. And the same happens with everything. I think we have an opportunity. What kind of tool, if you want to speak a bit more about it?
So we're building a tool that thinks about talent continuity, so around succession, around critical roles, but most importantly is one that, I think we started a conversation also say a lot of HR tech is best practice because we give you a framework. We say, for example, a leadership framework. This is how we assess good leaders, and you bring all your data onto this platform and we assess based on what we believe. So we're building something where we take your organizational unique framework that you have built for yourself and you put that into a tool and align that to what is your business vision, what does it align to the critical skills and roles that you're looking for, and then how do we then look at the talent you have and think about how do you navigate them into that next stage of the critical roles, right? But I think the most important feature that I continue to figure out and to make it really what the intent that I want it to be is that for me, it's really important for these tools, these talent tools, to not be predictive. I don't want a tool to say, Maddie has a 80% chances of being successful in this role. Susan has 20% success for this role, and therefore she's not in the succession pipeline, right? The tool isn't, I'm not building a tool for predictive, but I do want to build a tool, number one, that helps you to see the biases within the data. So it needs to say you cannot make a decision between Maddie and Susan because you had collected 3 data from Susan, but 16 data on Maddie. That's number one. I want that call out. I want a tool that help us to facilitate better conversation. If we're deciding who is going to be the next head of marketing, let's have a framework or guide for people who need to make decision to use this to help them to make better insights. So asking better questions. And that's kind of the type of tool we want to navigate. And then actually in the longer term, what I'm really excited about is thinking about how do we start inviting talent into talent planning. So right now, I could say Maddie is perfect for the GM for Vietnam. And then I give it to you, say, I never want. And then, and then when we come to you, you're like, I never, ever going to move to Vietnam. I'm not interested. And you're like, why would you spend 12 months imagining this, right? So how do we invite talent into conversation in a way that's not fatigue? So I don't have a solution. This is part of the vision is that we close a loop where we actually know what Maddie wants to do, right? And not forcing people into a vision of our succession. Because what happens now, succession is really manual. It's also very one-sided. It's also very business-oriented versus if Maddie wants to be the next HR, what is a pathway for you to get there? How do we build agility of growth in these talent conversations? So that's kind of the third piece. Right now, we're just building the front.
It's super hard, by the way, because
of course,
I mean, plenty of things. But for instance, I would love to be the head of HR. I'd probably be terrible at it, but I would love to be. The funny thing is, imagine that you hire me for marketing and I'm the marketing manager. Obviously, I want to be the head of HR, but I don't want to tell my boss because he's probably seeing me in the next go-to-market role, not in the HR. So there's an anonymity to it. Yeah, difficult.
No, it's super difficult. And that requires, again, goes back to all these tools it needs to be implemented under a particular sort of mindset and framework, right? And it's not saying you say you want to be head of HR and you become a head of HR. It just means that if you have expressed an interest, how do we have a informed conversation around it rather than no? Versus, okay, but even what's HR, because you could be a perfect role for employer branding, technically, right? So it's not just like there's so much more complex and nuances between roles. So how do we bring out that using technology is what we would love to build. But I think fundamentally just right now, even the first step is how do we make sure we make decision with holistic data? Do you know how difficult it is to pull data across on talent and synthesize it even to make a one synthesized perspective about talent? That currently probably takes 60 to 70% of the HR's time to prepare before a conversation. So people are tired by the time they get into a conversation because they're so tired navigating data. So this is what I mean by connecting the dots is that there are so many wonderful tools that's already being built with so many data. So how do we correlate? How do we bring these data together to correlate a synthesizing multi-dimensional representation of a talent before you talk about talent?
I agree with you. The only problem is if you go towards the I don't want one score, the synthesis you have, as soon as you start having numbers, it becomes...
No numbers.
But it's numbers that you're trying to aggregate across platforms. If you have text... I mean, with AI, you will be able to do the text thing, but it's not going to be
text.
tomorrow.
So that's why it's hard, right? We're building text to be able to say, for example, presenting you, Maddie, a lot of time in an organization, they have limited data. It becomes, what have you done in the last 1 year? What have you done in the last 3 years, right? Versus there's so many tools out there in terms of, do we understand your digital presence? Do we understand what is your LinkedIn? What is your history for the last 20 years of working? What is some of these? So these things right now.
It starts being scary.
Well, I think it's about how do we present data in a multi-dimensional way and not one-dimensional, one way, right? And again, it feels scary because we're now building so much historical
footprints,
right? So you're right. It might come out and say, Maddie said something really racist 20 years ago. But the whole point, actually, the tool that works should be, it calls it out. He has said something not so cool 20 years ago. Let's look at his interaction in the organization for the last 3 years. Does it highlight any red flag? If the answer is no, as human being, we should make an informed decision to say that is okay. Versus a AI predictive says he said something 20 years ago and therefore immediately he's dead. He's never considered for any promotions in any cross-cultural teams. That is a predictive versus the question that we want to have is that what does this mean now for the Maddie now and the decision we're going to make in the future?
So this collection of data and then what kind of algorithm you can run without having predictive of yes, no answer, but more, good luck.
I know.
Luck.
It's fun. It forces me to rethink about interaction of technology, asking better questions. The hypothesis we're building on is how to ask better question to make better decision with better data. That's really the hypothesis. But of course, hypothesis is to be tested, to be proven, to be disproven, finding the right fit for the right team size, right? And, I can imagine, does that work for a 6,000 company versus a 200? What does that look like? So we're going to be doing some tests for our existing client anywhere between like 10 people to 200. And that's kind of our test point to just start to see, can we see an increase? That may be a beautiful point of that inception that is the best quality outcome, right? So I think these are all the things that we're going to have to trial and test. And that's what makes it exciting to see what we can come out from this.
One last question, and I promise I'll let you go. You mentioned grit and you mentioned growth mindset or growth. I don't remember the other.
Growth mindset. Yes.
Growth mindset. One of the things that I've experienced for the past few years is having so many recipes out there you were talking about best practices. So recipes are the take on how to build an organization, how to be more creative, blah, blah, blah. There are so many recipes. There's like universal principles behind them, but they're not always appearing in the books. How do you know that what you know now or what you apply is the right thing? Knowing the sea of data, how do you know that you've consumed the right data? What is the place of intuition? How did you get to those insights that are driving you?
So the reality is that you don't know, right? You don't know everything. That's the beauty. So how do we write from a perspective of, I think, experience, right? I think is be able to synthesize some of these through experiences rather than theoretical construct of all these different researchers out there. Bring in understanding experience, but also understanding what you have put out there is also a point in time, right? I think we even had the conversation is, there's typos, there are things that can be corrected for version 2. But to me, the version 2, if it doesn't evolve the thoughts, then it should remain to be version 1. And you know what? It's okay. It's imperfect. There are things that people know that AI didn't write the book because it's imperfect. There's imperfection. I think there's beauty in it. So, short answer is you don't know. So you should write from a point of, I think, experience, synthesizing that, articulating that with reality. But at the end of the day is how do we provide insights? And that's why I like to make things really practical, because then the reader can choose what speak to them from a very practical sense, right? Choose to say, I want to try the deep learning. I want to try the deep way to ask 3 whys, right? These things that are what's being offered to you, just like recipe has been offered to you as options, but eventually is how do humans make those choices and practice what's right for them. But it's not universal truth. I'm not saying that's the truth. I'm saying that is within my world of experience, what I'm offering you as my point of experience and point of a conversation to distill it. And that is where you open up for conversations like this one, right? What I would love for hopefully a good book to do. It opens up conversations. We don't sit here talk about the textbook of the scientific formula of something because that's more black and white.
True.